Okay. What am I looking for? Oh, there we go. Okay. Mhm. Okay, so I'm going to get started here. We had discussed that as I do the presentation, you guys can ask questions along the way if you want. However, you're supposed to do that in Zoom. I don't know how, but Alicia and Adrian, I guess, are going to be monitoring that.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Let me close this here a little bit so that's not in my way. Okay. All right, you guys. So here we go. So you're only seeing my slideshow now, right? You're not seeing me.
We
Is
can
that
see
correct?
a small square version of you.
Okay. Okay. Cool. All right. All right. Kind of. I mean, okay. Here we go. All right. So anyway, this is my presentation on how the De Anza's Environmental Science Department started the journey to help save Coyote Valley. So there's been a lot of groups that have been involved in this whole trying to save Coyote Valley, that last little piece of it from being developed. And one of the very earliest groups in there was the De Anza Environmental Science Group. So I'm going to kind of go into a small portion of just a little bit of a historical timeline of the environmental science program for De Anza College and start there. And then it'll kind of transition us right into the Coyote Valley project, okay? So, and again, if you have questions along the way, just please feel free to do it however you're supposed to do it. Raise a hand or put it in chat. And Adrian and Alicia will take care of that. Okay, what am I doing now? All right, so if we look at kind of the beginnings of the De Anza Environmental Studies program / science program, it really kind of started around the 1991 timeframe. And at that time, Doug Cheeseman, who we know is the guy who created the environmental study area, the ESA, he had actually at that point been looking to retire from De Anza College and kind of move on to doing his own thing, creating his, of course, his expedition company that he has, Cheeseman Safaris. At that time, Doug was instrumental in being part of the hiring committee to hire who was going to kind of take on the environmental science program at that point. It kind of was just a few classes that Doug taught along this topic, mostly under the Department of Biology. There wasn't at that point yet an actual environmental studies / environmental science program yet, but the idea to go that direction was definitely the way that senior administration and people within the sciences were thinking at the time. So at that time, the first person to be hired into the program was Julie Phillips. And she served as the chair of the department for many, many, many years and retired about 5 years ago, I believe, from our department. Along the same line, there were finally, within that time frame, 2 other full-time faculty that were hired in. That would be Vicki Jennings and Kristen Sullivan. Most of you that are in the program, if you met anybody, probably would have been Kristen Sullivan because she retired about 3 years ago. So if you've been around that time frame or doing classes in our program, you might have met Kristen. But Julie retired, like I mentioned, about 5 to 6 years ago. Vicki Jennings, unfortunately, passed away probably about 4 to 5 years ago, and she was a fantastic instructor. And then Kristen Sullivan, about 3 to 4 years ago, she retired. At the time, in that early beginnings, that 1991 to 2005 timeframe, we would get about 200 to 250 students registering for classes that were in the ES and ESI format per quarter. So it was a good amount of students, but not a lot. The ESA had been on campus since about 1971. So Doug had that entire project he undertook, and I think I've told you Some of you have been on tours with me at the ESA, and you probably heard the Doug Cheeseman story and how that was created. I won't go into that now because I think I'm on to do California plant communities down the road here, and that's when I'll be getting into the ESA stuff in a little bit more in depth, okay? So doing an environmental studies science building was kind of in the thinking stages between 1995 and 1996. Julie Phillips had come in. She had pretty much started to write a lot more curriculum and courses for the program. She was starting to look at creating degrees and certificates for the program. And she really wanted to grow this program. I mean, large. She wanted to grow it very large, this particular program. And that's when she began thinking, what if we had a green building on this campus, an actual environmental studies, environmental science building? And she really felt along the line that that whole concept of build it and they will come. And that's what she always said, build it and they will come. I know they will. So she went all throughout the state and throughout the United States with the chancellor of Foothill De Anza at the time, which was Martha Cantor. And Martha Cantor later went on to work under the Obama administration in Washington. And so that's when Judy Minor took over. Well, in terms of that, Martha Cantor was very well connected politically in this area up and down and had lots of contacts. So she basically said to Julie, I'll take you, I'll get you the appointments, I'll get you the connection, but you're the one that has to sell it. You're the one that has to fundraise and get the money if that's what you really want to do on this campus. I think it's a great idea. I support it, but you will have to raise the money. And so Julie did go through, and she went all around with Martha Cantor, and of course, raised a lot of money, multi-millions, to break ground and to create the Kerr Center. So by fall of 2005, we opened our doors for the first time. So we'd have been on campus this year in the fall quarter where we're at right now, doing everything off campus. We would have celebrated our 15-year anniversary, okay? So the whole idea about build it and they will come actually did happen very successfully. So when we were at the prime of our program, where we had 4 different certificates and degree programs at the time, and we had the Kerr Center, and it was connected right next to that ESA, and we began to do things in a very different way. It was the very first platinum green building on any community college campus all across the US. So this was big, and students and everybody knew about the program, they knew about the building, they knew about all the courses that we could offer. And so our enrollments went up significantly. So we're now building to 1,000 to about 1,200 students per quarter in terms of our enrollments. Lots of classes at the time were being created. And so we were at the prime there in terms of building the program and doing what we needed to do in terms of educating and bringing people in that could be passionate about the environment. And so around that time, we created more classes. We had 4 certificates and degree programs. We built the building, we increased the enrollments. And so now it was time to look for a new project. And so that's the direction we went. There was a biodiversity specialist degree that was written for the program, and it was actually managed by Vicki Jennings, but they were slowly evolving it into a different sort of degree that would still have a lot of the biodiversity specialist courses and things that they would emphasize on within the teachings, but they wanted to go into a different title for that particular degree. And so they were looking at several different ways to kind of word it so that it would be more, let's say, marketable in the job market down the road when you go on to other universities, UCs and CSUs, and the fact that you came from De Anza College having this so-called wildlife science technician certificate or degree. It would say that you were an individual that spent a lot of time out in the field doing a lot of important work in terms of trying to preserve areas or trying to just educate the masses in terms of the open spaces that we have. So we were doing so many classes at that time that we were actually running classes Monday through Saturdays. Um, and Monday through Friday, we were actually opening the building for first classes coming in like 7:30 in the morning, and we would be closing those doors at 10 o'clock at night. So we had a huge program and a lot of students that showed a lot of interest in the program. And so we began to look at what research project would we take on. So Julie Phillips, who again was the chair at the time during those years, she had been reading a lot of what was going on in the local area because a lot of some faculty will do projects that are in other countries or help do things that are out of state or in other areas where they lived at. Julie was really more about locally, how do we preserve what we have? How do we take care of what's around us? And so she had gotten through information through various sources, and then also just being well connected in the field about this project going on out in Coyote Valley. And what they were looking at was to put develop a small town about the size of Mountain View and slap it down in Coyote Valley in the last undeveloped preserved area of Coyote Valley. And Julie brought faculty, staff, and students all together, began talking to us about what she was hearing and what she was reading, and that this was going to be a multi-million-dollar development project, and they were going to just do density housing and create all this infrastructure of roads and schools and small shopping centers and things like that. And she was concerned about the wildlife out there because there wasn't a lot of untouched, unpreserved area out in Coyote Valley. So as we began to all kind of look at what was going on and reading things, we began to then start taking our trips out there and getting a feel for the area ourselves. So during the week, during classes, late at night, on the weekends, there were several trips by many of us and many experts taking these trips out to Coyote Valley and just spending just enormous amounts of time out there looking around and questioning things. And we were bringing in experts that had their expertise in the GIS and botany and geology, birding, the arts, history. We were bringing in lawyers. We were asking for other biologists with other expertise to come in. We had the photographers there. We had videographers there. We did everything to kind of just start to just how important or how great is this area that they're looking at actually taking and removing what's there and putting something completely man-made in. And as we went out there and began looking at it and seeing what was going on and looking at evidence of animal movements, we all became very concerned that they actually wanted to put this small town in this last bit of undeveloped area of Santa Clara County. So we had to also pick up a lot of fundraising at the time also, because we saw that this was going to cost money to have students and faculty and staff involved in this. We'd have to be buying equipment. We'd have to be making sure that students had rides down to some of the main meetings that would be going on at night and during the week. So we were really focused in on how do we really kind of control what's happening here or get involved and help stop it before it happens. Because at this point, they were really looking at developing this area very quickly. And they were trying to move on it very fast. And that's normally what developers do when they want to develop in an area. I haven't taken a breath, so I'm gonna stop for a second and make sure that nobody had questions along the way that I've missed so far. Okay. So this was Julie Phelps. We had some maps upstairs in our whole, what I call the bullpen area, to show that whole area and what was around it. And this is the whole area that we would go out and take a look at and drive these various spots of this Coyote Valley untouched, undeveloped area. And we would be out there with the experts and like I mentioned, for hours and hours on end, just looking at all this stuff and how things would be affected. So here's a map And what they're looking at is that you can see the color coding up here. Let me move this little chat box out of the way. Um, the light green areas you see in here were the protected lands at this point. All the white that you see on this map right here, that you see all around here, those were already developed. So these are areas that were completely developed, all right? And then, as you can see right here, these would be your wetlands. So there was this very important little wetland slice right here on this map, okay? And then this spot here was the area that they actually wanted to develop. As you can see, all this white area, as I mentioned, was completely developed all around it. There were some protected lands near the mountains, both the Diablo Range higher up and Santa Cruz Mountains, but a lot of development. If you ever hiked the peak all the way to the top of Santa Teresa County Park, and you look out both north and east and south, you can easily see all the development around you, and you can see that one small patch of area that was yet to be developed. And that was the area that the developers had all wanted to get their hands on. And you know that by doing, if they would have put a small town in this area here, the size of Mountain View, imagine what it would have done to this particular wetland here. It definitely would have affected it, okay? All right. So one of the first things we wanted to look at once it was ready for public view was the EIR, okay? And the EIR is, of course, the environmental impact report, that when you're looking at large development projects or projects that could affect surrounding things around it, then an EIR has to be developed, and it has to be at some point, once they've gone through all of their different 18 categories of looking at it and saying, yes, there's going to be a problem, or no, there's not going to be a problem, then they have to make sure that it's available for public view. And it's actually used as a mitigation tool. And not all mitigations, they're not, when mitigation happens, when you think about, let's say, for instance, let's say there's an issue with a development project that's going to impact a certain butterfly species, for instance, because maybe it's going to remove, this development project's going to cut off 10 acres of a endangered or a butterfly in an area, and they go, well, we don't like that, because if you take those 10 acres of the habitat for this butterfly, then what would happen is that we're going to see this butterfly decline and maybe even go extinct. So they have to mitigate that. And so normally the way those mitigations go, especially for a small animal insect species, is, okay, we came back to the table and we understand that you're concerned about, this butterfly losing 10 acres of their habitat. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to give back in this other area nearby another, let's say they even come back and say, we're going to give them 12 acres, so we should be happy with 12 acres that they're losing 10 there, but very close by, they're going to get 12 acres back. But what they're going to give back is fragmented pieces of acreage. So, an acre here, 2 acres over here, maybe an acre and a half over there, maybe way up high over here, another 3 acres. So that from being in the sciences, once you start fragmenting their habitat and they don't travel very far, but within that particular habitat, now they've got to cross over things to get to other ranges of their habitat, that's not good for that species, right? But that's how they try to mitigate it. They try and mitigate things to the very minimum and make it look like they're doing the right thing and giving you everything that you need. But in reality, they're not really giving the species of concern that you're fighting for. What you're giving them is nothing, because once you start breaking up their habitat and fragmenting it, then you've created an entire different behavior for that particular species to be able to continue to progress, in terms of being able to breed and successfully. So um, the environmental impact report was really something that came from the CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. In about 1970 or so, they said part of that CEQA, there's a provision in there that says you have to do these environmental impact reports and look at these important categories. So I'll pass by this one here. So for instance, an example would be in terms of mitigation, I gave you one on the butterfly, but another one that would be very common would be, let's say that you're going to put in a new freeway down, when they put in 280 40 years ago or so, or when they put Highway 85 in. One of the things that would have to definitely mitigate for those types of constructions would be things like the categories of air pollution, sound or noise pollution, increased CO2 emissions, and that type of thing. So they'll say, well, yeah, the freeway's going to run right along this neighborhood, and there's going to be a neighborhood on the left side, and there's going to be one on the right side here, but that we have to put this freeway down there, right? So they're going to mitigate those things. And what they normally do is they would say in terms of those, well, there's going to be a sound noise problem because there's going to be all these cars passing through all the time. And so the neighborhood that's adjacent to that freeway that we're building is going to create all this horrible noise traffic. It's going to be bad for the people there. So what they normally do then is they look at these very tall sound retainer walls that they put up. You can see my arrow kind of just showing you that one in the first picture on the top there. And then you can see some vegetation that they'll plant, because they'll say, between planting trees that'll get nice and big and bushy, or like in the second picture here where you start to see vines and trees growing all across this. So if they plant on either side of this retainer wall, that helps reduce the noise and the CO2 emissions and things like that. So that's how they would mitigate that particular issue when people say, I'm concerned about, I'm going to live right next to that freeway and I have all these problems with noise and CO2 emissions and everything. So they have to mitigate those things. So these are the categories usually that are covered on the EIR. I don't know if any of those have changed or they've added any or taken any of those off, but those are pretty much the main categories that have to get covered during major development projects. Okay, so that's what we were looking at for Coyote Valley. We were waiting for the EIR to come out, and when the EIR came out, we said this is the category that we're most interested in looking at, what their findings were, the biological resources. So as we read through the EIR as a team, one of our meetings in the evening, what we found out was that the language that in the findings from them going out and taking a look at if there would be any impact to the biological resources around it, they came back and said pretty much no. There were no large animal movements. There were no species of special interest. There were no endangered species, both animal, plant, insect, and or whatever. There was no problem with any of that, and that they would not be affecting. There weren't any birds out there they were just your regular typical crows and turkey vultures and sparrows and things like that, but nothing that they could say was special about the birds that were out there. The plants, they talked about the plants and the landscape there, and they said there's other than a few oaks that can be preserved with the development, beyond that, there's not any special plants out there that are endangered or that are a species of concern or any of that. So they basically came back and in this particular category said, no problems there. We can, we're not affecting anything with this. And of course, they had all the other areas that they were looking at, I'm sure, like air quality and the cultural resources. Of course, we knew that even that area we would go out to the Coyote Valley area a lot, and we would meet with a lot of different groups out there. And one of the groups that we actually met out there were the people that we brought on campus. What was it? Winter quarter, Alicia? Did we bring them in? And that was the Amamutsan tribal group. And they talked about how other development had been done in the area, and that um, even when they've gone through and bulldozed through areas and they found human remains, bones, that the developers weren't stopping like they're supposed to do. They're supposed to stop when they find human bones and say, we got to bring the experts out here to figure out how old are these bones and could they possibly be Native American from burial sites. And if so, then they have to kind of go back and mitigate a whole different way on that particular thing if they find that. And the Amamutsan were coming back and telling us, just horrible stories about other development that had taken place, and that they knew that there were burial sites, and that human remains were found and they weren't being contacted. So, the developers a lot of times would just keep forging ahead and try and get past all of this and hope that nobody stops them along the way and calls them on, their findings.
And
So,
Diana, Helian had a question.
okay,
He was wondering if who wrote the EIR and if Dianza was involved in the environmental impact study.
we were, I'm trying to figure out who wrote it. I don't know if it was, I don't remember which developer was trying to get that area. I want to say Sobrato, but that's just because Sobrato's has built a lot out in that area, but I'm not positive, Hellion.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
we were not involved in the actual writing of the EIR, because by the time Julie had brought this particular proposed development project to us, EIR had already been written, and they weren't going to give us anything until it became a public document. Once
I found,
it became the public document, Julie and Pat and Kristen were down there, I mean, waiting for them to post it, and immediately they got the copy and they brought it back, and we held a meeting and we went through the EIR. And
mm,
we looked at everything on the EIR, but we were particularly concerned about those biological resources and what did they do. So this is kind of what we got from that EIR, that they
uh,
were talking about. Again, no large mammal movements were happening, out in that area. One of the biggest things that they said, and you'll see this on the map again that I'll show you in a second, was that Highway 101 that's down there divides the two mountain ranges. So it divides the Santa Cruz mountain range and the Diablo mountain range. And because it divides the two mountain ranges, that's why no real large mammal movements were occurring. So the mountain lions and the coyotes and the badgers and all those types of animals that were on the east portion of 101 towards Diablo Range, they weren't mixing at all with those tame species from the west side of the 101, because that was the Santa Cruz mountain range. And with 101 coming straight down those two mountain ranges, there were no large mammal movements, because the fact that, they try to move on those freeways, they just get run over and killed. So animals have learned to stay on their own sides of the freeway, right? And they also stated that there was no threatened, no vulnerable, no endangered species of any sort existing in this valley at all. So that was the complete findings on that particular category of the EIR. And again, we always ask the questions, and I seem to be asking it more and more these days, is where is the oversight? How did this whole thing happen? We wanted to kind of question the methodology. So let me ask you guys, some of the students here, when we look at the methodology of their research occurred during regular normal business hours. So probably like anywhere between 8 and 5 p.m. So what is wrong with that picture, just right offhand, you guys? One of the students want to take a stab at that?
What about nocturnal animals?
Exactly. Who was that? Was that UKP?
Yeah.
Okay. That's right. So, again, no oversight, right? These developers hire companies. They probably have a handful of companies that they work with, and they go, we're going to go do this development project now. And so they're ready to do this development project. Oh, we gotta make sure we go out and we look at any special animals, plants, birds, whatever. We got to go out and do that, right, guys? So I need you guys to go do a report. So biologists get in their cars or whoever they hire, and they go out there, and they go out there during the daylight hours. And they like, I don't see any small animals. I don't see any large mammals moving at all. They're inactive. Then they talk about the freeway dividing the two, and so I remember in one of the meetings, Julie sarcastically asked, "Well, did your guys even get out of the car?" Because they were saying there's nothing out there. And of course, we had already been out there for several weeks looking at this stuff and with our binoculars and our cell phone cameras and taking some, going, my God, this is cool. We see this, we see that. We were all excited about all this stuff. So when they said there's nothing out there that's special, I remember Julie said to them, "Did your guys even get out of their cars, or did they just drive through and look?" And they kind of looked at us kind of like, that's a very sarcastic question. We're not even going to answer it. But I know because I know Julie, she was really seriously asking that question. Did you guys even get out of your cars to look? Because it doesn't seem like it. Because we had been out there and we had seen a lot. So so we decided to kind of just really focus in on trying to get evidence of animals and animal movements and stuff, and bringing our experts in early on. A couple of slides back, I mentioned that we brought people in that had expertise in GIS and the soils, geology, plants, botany, birds, mammals, watersheds. We brought any expert out there that we could to get them to look at this area and tell us something significant about this area within their expertise. And so we were now hedging into fall winter when we were looking at challenging the information that we had seen on the EIR. And so we began going out there on Saturdays, on the weekends, evenings. It was raining. We'd get out of our cars, we'd walk the area, and really kind of going at that time really gave us what we really needed in terms of some evidence and stuff. So we began taking photos of different animal tracks, and as we took this evidence in and tried to show these in the different council meetings, that look, we see different animals out here. We're seeing coyotes, we're seeing raccoons, we're seeing badgers, we're seeing mountain lions, we're seeing all these different animals. They're basically saying, yeah, we see that, but it's the evidence just not good enough yet. So we were like, okay, go back out again. This time we decided we would cast the tracks so that we could bring in these actual casts and define for them what they were. This is a deer track, this is a mountain lion track, this is the bobcat track, and would explain our methodology of how we would cast it. They kind of look at it and go, oh, those are kind of cute, but we're still not seeing evidence of any movements between anything, and there's nothing out there that's really that special. So then, we even look at animal scat, bring in that as evidence, of course, boxes with plastic or Ziploc so that we don't gross them out too much. But we're like, this is the actual animal scat. Again, well, your information's still not good enough. So we go, okay, so we're out there another time. And we actually kind of start to walk some of these little culverts. So culverts, are these underground tunnels under the freeways. So when you've got ice at the top of the Mount Hamilton Mountains, Diablo Range, it's been a nice cold heavy winter, and then that starts to melt. If you don't have these culverts where these water would travel through under the freeways, you'd end up with all kinds of car accidents if this water just flowed over the freeways, right? So these culverts were all these culverts along the way of Highway 101. And as some of the key students that were in there looking around and crawling through these culverts, what they found is that they found mountain lion tracks and black-tailed deer tracks and badger tracks and all these tracks showing going into two different directions under these culverts. So that they were going in one direction at a certain time of the night, and same night or maybe a few nights later, you'd see, those same animal tracks coming back out going the other direction. And it was at that point that we said, you know what? We think there is large animal movement between the two mountain ranges, and they're using the culverts. They're smart. They know not to use the freeway. They go across the freeway, they're going to get hit, they're going to get killed, right? But we can tell that they're using these culverts to travel from the Mount Diablo mountain range to the Santa Cruz Mountains, and from the Santa Cruz Mountains back to the Mount Diablo range. It was a continual back and forth between and that we saw in terms of evidence of track movement and scat and other stuff in these culverts. So we were really excited about that. And that's when we said, they're not gonna take any of our evidence that we've taken in so far unless we have true visual evidence of it. So again, I mentioned earlier on that we were always continually trying to do fundraising. And there were a couple of really key donors that at the end of every year, I think for a tax write-off, they would, write us a $20,000 check and say, this is from, this particular family. And we would then turn around and buy equipment that we needed for Coyote Valley. And so we started buying the different cameras, and we started getting images of the animal movements. Now, I had to take this one off of the internet. This is not one of our own. This one's one from Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority's cameras. But De Anza was actually the first group to put the cameras in this area and get permission and permits to put cameras up in various areas aimed at these culverts so we could pick up the evidence, because we weren't the only group trying to stop the development. They really wanted to preserve this area, not have any development out there. So there was a lot of local and state government groups that were very interested in us doing this work so that we could get the evidence. And so we have a lot of tons of images back at the Care Center, of course, that we have archived on different.
Pero no vi que decía join to out.
And so, I'm sorry, did I miss something? Okay, so we finally got the evidence we needed in terms of the camera images there. And we were able to show the movement between those two ranges, like I mentioned, with the tracks, our pictures, the track casting, the scat, and then finally the camera work. And the camera work is really when they had to stop and take a look at it and go, wait, what are you seeing now? And again, here's one of the maps where again, that one I showed you earlier and showing you the undeveloped area that they wanted to slap that down in. So you've got Highway 101 here, right? And they were saying species in this range only stay on this side, and they were saying species on this range only stay over here, and there's never any species crossing with each other genetically, that they're genetically isolated on the two mountain ranges. And we proved that that was incorrect. There was genetic diversity going on all around these two mountain ranges because of those culverts that they were using to travel in. Oh, I think that's the end of my presentation there. So anyway, as a result, they didn't develop that area. And I think maybe saw the San Jose Mercury News article about a month ago at the most, where they actually, the group that's up there where we used to go up there and park near that Coyote Valley Ranch up there, that group had owned acres, thousands of acres of land since about the 1940s or something like that. And they recently sold a large portion of that back to open space and other state agency groups so that it could be preserved again for, the future generations. So it's good to see that we're kind of moving back in that direction. And I think, you guys, that might be it. Yeah, that was it. Now I close this, right?
You might want to leave it open in case folks have questions. Well, you can always reshare it.
I can always reshare it, yes.
So do folks have questions about how, my dog has questions about how this process happened and what students did and that process, or wildlife camera work, things like that?
And I think the other thing that I would like people to think about, those are really good questions to think about. But I guess, as I see like you and Helene and Alicia spearheading this, a new AS degree, you know, again, I think we always got to think about, well, what's that next project we're going to take on and kind of champion. So I love to also have students think about that also, like what are things that you know that we still need to do and have to make happen. And,
Ah,
you know, we've done a few small things around like the Monarch Garden and Preserve and things like that, but there's, you know, there's always a project we've got to sink our teeth into and give you guys exposure and experience and the opportunity to kind of chase these things and learn how to do this stuff real time.
yeah. And I love how your story shares this process. Like Helian was pointing out that the developer was the one that was bringing in the biologists, and that how problematic that is. And then folks aren't being kind of vigilant and kind of, and they made you keep bringing more and more evidence. And so it's really it's a good story, and it's a true story of what needs to be done. So do folks have questions for Diana, either in the chat or audio? Or I love that question that Diana had, like what do we want to do next? Like do you all see other places that are threatened or that need that you've been wondering about protecting? And we could put folks in groups to kind of think about this if we wanted to try breaking out to talk about these things, we could as well.
I
Can I
have a question.
quickly?
Oh,
Oh yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Are you sure?
Go ahead, Christy.
I kind of had a question for Dan, because in the description of this whole camera trapping and everything, it sounds like there was like a big movement among the students, among the teachers and everybody, and there was like, just seems like an abundance of effort towards this thing.
Mhm.
And in the last few years, or at least in the time that I've been in De Anza, I've not seen that level of desire for investment in these kinds of things, and maybe kind of not at the Kirsch Center in general. What do you think has changed and caused that to happen? Like, what's the difference between now or recently and then when the camera trapping work was being done?
I'm going to answer your question in a way that's personal, and then maybe Alicia or Adrian or Helen would answer it differently. Okay. Um, I think what I see, I mean, especially having kind of experienced these last 4 political years, right? Having been in quarantine since March 14th, having to seeing a lot more information, really appreciating kind of the fact that we need a science degree. I'm not willing to kind of sit back and just let things happen anymore. We got to get that passion and that drive back that we had during this project. And once you go through a project like that and then you're done, you know, you kind of get ready to ramp back up to the next thing you want to do, to bring another new greater experience for the students. And at the time, like I mentioned, when we finished up the Coyote Valley project, what kind of happened at that point was that much of our senior people in the group that had been that part of that first movement retired, moved on, and there's been a whole new group of us that came through, and new leaders, people that were maybe, you know, the newbie on the block were now the senior on the block, and just having to catch your feet and catch your breath in that area, and then starting to look at, you know, we do have the money, we do have the resources, but things seem to move very oddly administratively on the campus anymore these days. And so I'm very anxious to get back so we can start fighting and opening these channels to make sure that these resources are open and available for our students, because we have a lot of really good talent in our faculty, especially our part-time faculty. I'm in admiration of Alicia and Adrian, Hellion, Ryan, Josh. Hopefully I haven't forgotten anybody in my group, but these are damn good instructors that have a lot of good experience and have a lot of passion, and they have a lot to teach all of us. And we just need to be able to have that to do. We need to do that. And my part and like Alicia's part will be to really break down those walls of what's holding us back from being able to kind of really excel and move forward on the projects we want to move forward on. So again, I'm answering it more on a personal level, just having been in quarantine, having to live through the last 4 years politically and really saying, no, things have got to change. And I'm a baby boomer, and I think I've said this to Alicia a lot, and I've said this to Moran, those of you that know Moran. Us baby boomers, we got to get out of the way. I mean, really, when we talk about progressive leadership and progressive direction, I'm all for that. And I know that I don't have, I mean, look at how I am on the Zoom, right? But I know that that's what we have to do to get to the next level in life, to the next best part of our life. And so I'm going to do everything I can to support the people that are pushing towards progressive ideas and progressive values and progressiveness just overall in what we do. That's what I can contribute to what's happening, and what to make sure that I just kind of help pave those paths for you guys so that the obstacles get out of the way.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Diana. Can I just quickly ask a question? Is the development project